Story 1. The policy implemented by Mao during difficult times aimed to eliminate sparrows because they were perceived as eating seeds in the fields. Under this policy, people killed sparrows in large numbers. It turned out that the supreme leader was mistaken. Sparrows were actually consuming insects that harmed the crops. Following the disappearance of sparrows, a massive famine occurred, resulting in thousands, possibly millions, of deaths. Story 2. Care in the community. The idea was that individuals with mental health issues would receive comprehensive support within their own communities, enabling them to maintain better connections and live fulfilling lives rather than being placed in institutions. This approach would ideally allow for the closure of most institutions. However, the focus was primarily on closing the institutions. This decision had, and continues to have, significant consequences. Story 3. Forcing companies to publish the list of their highest-paid executives and their salaries created a league table that they all used to negotiate higher compensation. The head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, who advocated for the rule, stated years after its implementation that they initially believed it would serve as a deterrent to excessive executive compensation. However, this did not occur. He expressed regret for supporting the rule. Story 4. Shutting down mental institutions was necessary due to poor management and significant human rights violations. However, now individuals with mental illness are often incarcerated instead. Story 5. In China, the Four Pests campaign aimed to eliminate rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows from the region because these animals spread disease and harm crops. The Smash Sparrows initiative caused significant ecological imbalance, leading to what is now known as the Great Chinese Famine, resulting in the deaths of tens of millions of people. Story 6. FDR's Wage Control Acts in the late 1930s led employers to offer health insurance as a way to attract better talent. You can see how that is affecting many people today. Story 7. Do you want to know why it seems like 90% of the vehicles on the road are large SUVs? That's because of a fuel efficiency mandate. However, it turned out to be easier to make bigger vehicles that fell into a different classification than to produce regular passenger cars that were sufficiently fuel efficient. Story 8. The Patriot Act. It didn't seem like a good idea to me at the time, but I was only 20, so what did I know? Apparently enough. Story 9. When India was still a British colony, the British government was concerned about the number of cobras and cobra bites in Delhi. They decided to incentivize killing the snakes by attaching a bounty to every dead cobra. This approach seemed sensible and appeared to work well for a time, until people started breeding cobras. Story 10. Eviction moratorium led to a significant departure of small landlords, while private equity firms and large landlords took the opportunity to acquire properties. Those who fell behind on rent became increasingly in debt and were subsequently evicted. Providing rental assistance would have been a more effective choice. Story 11. The Paycheck Protection Program and the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act provided substantial financial support with minimal oversight, resulting in the largest amount of fraud in history. Story 12. The one-child policy aimed to control population growth in China. However, it led to gender imbalances and issues related to an aging population. Story 13. Great moments in unintended consequences. Story 14. The laws in the United States established the 401k system. Ted Benna intended 401k plans to be supplementary to the traditional pension plans offered by employers. Employers used the existence of the 401k system to justify dismantling these programs by stating it was the responsibility of employees to provide for their own retirement. Since the system was never designed to be a standalone program to fully fund retirement, the middle class faced challenges. Story 15. The forest fire prevention and response. For many forests, natural fire cycles are just part of life. Routine controlled burns are the safest way to clear underbrush. Unfortunately, when the Forest Service faced scrutiny, they shifted focus to fighting forest fires. The result was an increase in underbrush, leading to even more disastrous fires. Story 16. Obama's Cash for Clunkers program was never a good idea because it damaged the used vehicle market for years. The individuals who most needed the lowest-priced vehicles saw the nationwide inventory significantly reduced. The only vehicles they could afford were eliminated. Story 17: Ronald Reagan and the End of Mental Health Institutionalization in the United States. I understand that confining individuals to mental health facilities can lead to abuse, and problematic staff can also be an issue. However, we need an alternative to prison or homelessness for individuals whose mental and cognitive disorders make them unsafe for themselves or others. Story 18. Many consider it the definition of the law of unintended consequences. Airline safety. The United States government planned to require seat belts and assigned seating for small children on airplanes. This seemed reasonable, but subsequent studies indicated that many parents with limited incomes opted to drive to their destinations instead, exposing their children to a significantly higher risk of death. The 55 miles per hour speed limit led drivers to divert from well-designed interstate highways to less safe backcountry shortcuts. When the speed limits were raised again, overall traffic deaths actually declined. Story 19. Citizens United has created widespread implications. Corporations are not people. Unlimited money in government is a terrible idea. Money is not speech. If a billionaire wants to stand on a street corner with a placard, that is their right. However, spending over $200 million on a campaign to secure government contracts is not free speech. Story 20. We will allow people in social housing to buy the houses they lived in at a low cost, reducing reliance on social housing. The result is that we may run out of social housing if we sell all the affordable houses and need to purchase more expensive ones. Story 21. Back in the 1990s, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy was promoted as progressive, as it was, at that time, forbidden for gay service members to serve in the United States military. The idea was that no one could demand to know if someone was gay, preventing discharge, and gay service members would theoretically be able to remain in the closet. In reality, the don't tell aspect was much more prominent, forcing service members to conceal any signs of their sexuality. They could still be investigated and discharged if any signs were found, theoretically as long as no one asked. This also resulted in the United States military losing valuable service members during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Story 22. Roof Insulation Scheme in Australia. A good initiative by the government to help people by funding the installation of insulation in roofs. However, some unscrupulous operators exploited the scheme, using unqualified individuals for installations. The scheme cost significantly more than it should have as companies took advantage of it, and there were unfortunate cases where individuals suffered due to improper installations. Story 23. The switch to permanent daylight saving time has been attempted before with significant support, but the long dark mornings during the school year raised safety concerns, leading to accidents involving children. I strongly support switching to permanent standard time, as many positive outcomes would result from this change, and medical professionals seem to agree. I am committed to this stance. Story 24. The UK's Right to Buy program was introduced after the bombings in World War II, as the country needed to rebuild most major towns and cities and provide affordable homes for the millions who lost theirs. For decades, many in the UK had been renting at low prices. Then, Margaret Thatcher came along with her short-sighted policies and introduced the Right to Buy initiative. If you had been renting from the council for years, you could purchase the home you were living in at a significantly discounted price. This created a generation of lower middle-class homeowners but depleted much of the country's affordable rental housing, leaving many from Generation X onward scrambling for what little they could find. Story 25. Nearly all rent control schemes aim to regulate rent prices to make housing more affordable. However, what they often do is trap tenants in apartments they may want to leave, increase costs for prospective renters by reducing supply, and discourage landlords from maintaining their rent-controlled units. While there are policies that can aid affordability, rent control is not one of them unless implemented with great caution. Story 26. The Affordable Care Act's 80-20 rule requires 80% of health insurance premiums to go to actual health care and no more than 20% to administrative costs. This seemed like a great idea. However, it created a situation where health insurance companies are disincentivized from negotiating lower health care costs. If health care costs more, they can charge higher premiums. That is the only way they can increase their revenue. They cannot take a larger share of the existing pie, so they have to expand the pie. Story 27. Clinton's changes to banking laws and pressure to issue subprime loans led to the 2008 housing crisis. Story 28. One state began drug testing welfare recipients, revoking benefits for positive results. It cost more to administer the tests than what was saved in revocations. Story 29. Plastic bag ban. We are now inundated with discarded reusable shopping bags instead of the lightweight single-use bags, which had a high rate of reuse for picking up dog waste, lining wastebaskets, and other uses. Story 30. EPA regulations on vehicle emissions have negatively impacted small trucks and SUVs, leading to the rise of large pickup trucks. Story 31. I believe the Irish government aimed to encourage the use of sustainable fuels by providing subsidies for wood pellets. However, the subsidy exceeded the value of the pellets, leading people to realize they could profit by burning wood. Consequently, some installed heaters in open barns running continuously or kept their windows open with heating on full blast. This resulted in profits for individuals, significant losses in taxpayer money, and increased carbon dioxide emissions in the atmosphere. Story 32. Making student loans non-dischargeable in bankruptcy caused our current crisis. Since President Biden contributed to this issue, it was particularly insulting when he attempted to offer a minimal solution instead of a comprehensive one. Story 33. Requiring health insurance or facing a fine mandates that health insurance companies generate substantial profits. Fines primarily affect the poor and middle class, while the wealthy can simply hire private physicians without insurance. Although it made healthcare slightly more accessible, it caused significant harm to people's financial well-being. A person earning just above minimum wage, paying high rents, and in good health may not have health insurance, yet they are subject to fines. This approach is unjust. Story 34. In the United States and generally in Western Europe, the 1960s and 1970s can be summed up as well-intentioned but flawed urban policy experiments that severely impacted cities. Many academics had theoretical ideas that failed to deliver results. This trend spanned all nations and political spectrums, with no single group held responsible except for intellectuals who lacked practical experience but had considerable influence in shaping policies. An entire field of political science and economics focuses on evaluating unintended consequences. One interesting concept is the focus fallacy. When the government initiates a program on a trial basis, everyone aims for its success. Consequently, a number of bureaucrats dedicate time to monitoring it, making it nearly impossible to obtain a true random sample. As a result, the pilot group is typically biased. If the program is deemed successful and attempts are made to expand its scope, it often becomes less effective due to fewer bureaucrats per participant. As the program grows, people learn to exploit the system because they are not monitored as closely. Behavior changes, undermining many of the initial advantages intended by the program. Story 35. No child left behind pushed children ahead even when they didn't learn what they needed to. As a result, they find themselves in advanced classes without a solid understanding of the foundational concepts, leading to greater failure. However, they are still pushed through the system. Consequently, high school diplomas have lost value, as everyone receives one like a participation trophy, and reality hits hard when students attempt to attend college and struggle. Story 36. Always socialism. It looks great on paper, but as George Orwell wrote, everyone is equal, but some are more equal than others. Story 37. In France, authorities decided to pass laws on food wastage, targeting ready-made meals and baked goods in grocery stores and bakeries. To avoid fines, these establishments produced much less, resulting in constant shortages. Story 38. Affordable housing requirements aimed at increasing American homeownership by lowering underwriting standards. In 1992, the Housing and Community Development Act required 30% of loans to be made to low-income borrowers. By 2008, the requirement was increased to 56%, which contributed to many bad loans and ultimately led to the Great Recession. Story 39. Prohibition. No more people getting drunk and committing crimes. No more alcoholics spending their paychecks on alcohol instead of their families. Sounds pretty good. It ended up creating more crime, leading to the rise of organized crime, and did not stop people from spending their money on alcohol at all. Story 40. No Child Left Behind distorted the demand for college. The Federal Reserve and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation subsidized health insurance through companies, which acts as a hidden tax for those furthest away from the financial sector, and the forced need for employment, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, the Transportation Security Administration, and the National Security Agency. There are many others that appear great, and we don't have proof of how harmful they are. Government will always lean heavily toward prudence over risk-taking. For example, regarding the AIDS epidemic, we have no idea how many died due to the Food and Drug Administration's lethargy in approving drugs that were effective in Europe. The same applies to various monopolies created based on strict protectionism for pharmaceutical companies. I could go on. Reason TV has a whole segment on unintended consequences, not all of which are government-related, but most are. The point of the segment is to keep in mind just how challenging it is to account for the unintended consequences of well-intentioned plans. Story 41. Everything happening now is hard to believe. Many people are supporting the removal of safety nets that currently provide them with essential support. Story 42. Mortgage interest deduction. After the first year or two, it inflated the price of housing and is now integrated. Story 43. The Affordable Care Act has left many of us in a challenging situation where the subsidies were minimal and the coverage remained out of reach. I could not afford a plan, so I ended up paying fines without any coverage. Meanwhile, the party claimed the plan was a success, labeling me a dissatisfied Republican for expressing my disappointment. I was earning $30,000 a year while subsidizing coverage for individuals making double that amount. Story 44. Prohibition. Alcohol is not good for us and causes significant societal issues. However, many people still enjoy drinking, and smuggling and organized crime also lead to substantial problems. Additionally, there are potential health risks associated with moonshine. Story 45. The British attempt to reduce the venomous snake population in British-occupied India by offering a bounty for all dead snakes led to unintended consequences. People began breeding snakes to turn them in for profit. When the British authorities discovered this scam, they ended the bounty program, prompting the breeders to release their snakes into the wild, which resulted in a significant increase in the venomous snake population. Story 46. Lots of government policies have unintended consequences. As they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act requires the use of electronic medical records to make prior records more easily accessible. The downside is that small private practices cannot afford millions to upgrade from paper charting, so they end up selling to larger corporate entities that have the cash to make the upgrades. Now there are far fewer choices in care, as they have essentially consolidated into 3 corporate options in my area. Additionally, it requires employers to provide health insurance to anyone who works 30 hours or more. To everyone's surprise, many employers reduced employees' hours from 40 to 29.5 per week. Previously, you may have had no health insurance. Now you are underemployed and lack health insurance. The No Child Left Behind Act really just encouraged teaching to the test and slowed down the entire class for the slowest students. The Great Society programs initiated by Lyndon B. Johnson provide government payments for families with children where there is no father present. Who would have thought that subsidizing single parenthood would lead to an increase in single parenthood? 6 out of 7 children in poverty would be lifted out of poverty if they had a second working parent in the home. Single parenthood increased dramatically after these social programs were instituted. Although not directly related to law, we see similar issues in medicine when administration imposes strict metrics. In my last job, management mandated that no more than a 2% emergency room transfer rate be allowed at urgent care. This resulted in many seriously ill patients needing to go to the emergency department. Previously, staff could simply evaluate patients and transfer those who needed higher levels of care. After the corporate crackdown, suddenly whenever an elderly diabetic with chest pain was assessed, everyone decided it was time to take a break or do anything other than care for the next patient. Such a crackdown on metrics does not improve care. It just leads to people avoiding the responsibility for transferring patients who absolutely need to be transferred. A friend of mine who also works in emergency medicine said, His hospitals started cracking down on admission rates within 30 days. In theory, this means ensuring that sick individuals aren't sent home who should be admitted or are receiving inadequate treatment. Ultimately, this results in everyone defensively admitting all their borderline cases, while those who previously prescribed oral antibiotics and arranged close primary care follow-up for a stable patient now push for hospitalization to avoid administrative reprimand. With any policy, it is crucial to consider what behavior you are incentivizing and whether you truly want more of that. People are rational actors and will respond to the incentive structures and rules you create. Story 47. The No Child Left Behind policy required teachers to focus on preparing students to pass standardized tests that determine school funding, rather than teaching them how to learn. As a result, many believe that it stifled creativity and hindered effective learning. Story 48. The War on Drugs. The War on Terror. No Child Left Behind. The Transportation Security Administration. The USA Patriot Act. Basically, most major domestic policy decisions of the last 20 years. Additionally, controversially, universal suffrage allows people who may lack knowledge about the issues to influence the government with their uninformed opinions, which can be detrimental. Story 49. Guardianships and conservatorship were intended to protect individuals deemed incompetent from self-harm. However, these systems were often susceptible to abuse and frequently implemented based on racial biases. Native American guardianships led to the Osage Reign of Terror in Oklahoma. Story 50. In California, Proposition 13 caps the total amount that residential property tax can increase year over year. It was enacted in the 1970s because real estate prices were climbing so rapidly that people were being forced to move out of their own homes due to inability to afford the tax bill. Voters enacted Proposition 13 to limit the increase. The problem was they capped it at around 2%. If a property is sold, its value is reassessed at current real estate prices, and the new owners pay the current tax rates. Fluctuating tax rates were a significant problem, and action needed to be taken. However, by setting the cap so low, it created a situation where people are discouraged from moving because their tax rates will skyrocket if they buy a new house. This has led to a situation on my block where we bought the smallest house by a fair margin. Yet all our neighbors who have been living in three-story Victorians for the past 30 years claim they couldn't afford to buy our property. It also means that school districts, which are funded by property taxes, are severely underfunded. It's a challenging situation with no easy resolution. Story 51. Rent control is essentially a lottery that allows some people to have reduced rent at the expense of everyone else because it freezes supply. In the same vein, zoning laws are meant to allow people and businesses to determine where they live and work. However, it restricts supply and contributes significantly to why homes and rents are so expensive today, as they are used as a tool against new development. The alternative minimum tax was designed to ensure that a small number of very wealthy families paid their fair share in the 1960s. But now it impacts millions far beyond what was intended. Social Security was meant to protect elderly individuals, but has instead become a system that requires each generation to have at least as many children as the previous one. I doubt people under 40 will receive anywhere near the benefits that our parents will. Homeowners associations are also similar schemes based on the same principle. Flood insurance and dialysis treatment in the United States are both funded by the government at significant cost to taxpayers. Both were intended to assist a small number of people but now serve a large population and cost billions each year. Honestly, one could compile a list of 1,000 items detailing U.S. laws, both ancient and recent, with massive unintended consequences. This is why I believe all laws should require renewal or expire automatically. Story 52. No Child Left Behind at least helped to increase the focus on teaching to the test instead of more important or more interesting subjects. My mother was on the local school board when it was being implemented, and even after reading through multiple large binders of information, this side effect was never mentioned. She feels terrible now that she and no one else on the board anticipated this outcome. I'm not saying no one saw it coming, but your average elected school board member who genuinely wanted what was best for everyone did not. It honestly makes me sad because she worked so hard in that position, and that regret clouds her memory of that time. Story 53. Some localities decided to replace their traffic lights with LED lights to save money on electricity. This change made sense at first. However, switching from incandescent bulbs to LEDs meant the lights produced less heat, which allowed ice and snow to accumulate and obscure the lights during winter. This led to more accidents at intersections and ultimately required regular dispatch of workers to clear the snow from the lights, resulting in costs that exceeded any savings. Story 54. Rent control. Almost anywhere it has been implemented, rent tends to increase due to decreased liquidity in the rental market. People in rent-controlled units move 3 to 5 times less often. It is essentially a not-in-my-backyard policy that benefits current renters instead of homeowners. Story 55. Expanding asylum eligibility. Large-scale immigration suppresses wages, increases income inequality, and, at least in Europe, has been associated with increased crime. Story 56. Abstinence-only sex education. Yes, that is the absolute way not to get pregnant. However, if we consider shows like Teen Mom and the education levels of some adults from that generation, along with the No Child Left Behind initiative, it may help explain a lot of what is happening. Story 57. Standard compensation for those wrongfully convicted is essential. One would hope it supports them, but in reality, it often leads prosecutors and governments to fight harder to protect wrongful convictions in order to avoid financial responsibility. This situation is unfortunate. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.